You are watching Grassroots Community Television, helping you make television people watch everywhere. Broadcasting on cable channel 82 in Glenwood Springs and Carbondale, and channel 12 in Aspen, Snowmass, Basalt, and Alldredge. Free over-the-air broadcasts throughout the Roaring Fork Valley. All programs can be watched anytime, anywhere at grassrootstv.org.
Book lovers, tune in to AWF Reads, the book discussion program presented by the Aspen Writers Foundation. At the Aspen Writers Foundation, sharing words, ideas, and stories are at the heart of all we do. Through our year-round program for all ages, we bring together readers and writers like you to celebrate the written word. For more information, call 925-3122 or visit aspenwriters.org. AWF Reads is generously sponsored by Elaine and Harris Kahn.
Hello, my name is Paul Andersen. I'm your host today for AWF Reads program on a book called The President, or El Señor Presidente, by Nobel Prize winner Miguel Asturias. Before we begin the discussion, I'd like to introduce my panelists. To my right is Chelsea Brundige. Chelsea's a writer and producer with First Light Films, an independent film and television company based in Snowmass. She also works part-time as a water policy consultant and director of Friends of Rivers and Renewables with the Public Council of the Rockies in Aspen. To Chelsea's right is Steve Alldredge. Steve Alldredge has been a professional writer, screenwriter, and journalist for over 30 years. He currently manages the local public relations and communications for the international real estate firm The Related Companies, and writes a weekly business column in the Snowmass Sun. Steve co-wrote the PBS distributed documentary Forever Wild, celebrating America's wilderness, with Chelsea, who produced it. Mitzi Rapkin, to Steve's right, has a BA in English and Religion from Indiana University and a master's in journalism from Northwestern University. As a kid, she read under the covers with a flashlight. After lights out, and enjoys reading into the wee hours of the night still, though now as an adult she has the lights on and is uncovered when she reads. She writes fiction and nonfiction and hopes to discuss one day her book on this program when it materializes. Mitzi, thank you for being here, panelists. The President, by Miguel Asturias, mirrors the events in Guatemala with a brutally satirical depiction of Manuel José Estrada Cabrera, who was president of Guatemala from 1898 to 1920. He forcibly took the presidency after the assassination of José María Reina. Cabrera burst into the Guatemalan cabinet meeting with pistol drawn to claim his entitlement to the presidency. One of Cabrera's most bitter legacies was inviting the United Fruit Company into Guatemala to expand the export economy of his country. Cabrera signed a contract with UFCO's Minor Cooper Keith in 1904 that gave the company tax exemptions, land grants, and control of all the railroads on the Atlantic side of the country. Cabrera often employed brutal methods to assert his authority. Former President Manuel Barrias was stabbed to death in Guatemala City on Cabrera's orders. One American minister returned to the United States, fleeing the country, claiming that there was a plan to poison him. Cabrera responded violently to workers' strikes against United Fruit, in one incident ordering an armed unit into the workers' compound. Arriving at night, they fired indiscriminately into the workers' sleeping quarters, wounding and killing an unspecified number. Cabrera put down revolts against his rule, and when elections were held by the people against his will, he had the president-elect murdered in retaliation. Cabrera resigned in 1920, having the loyalty of only a few generals. The National Assembly charged that he was mentally incompetent. Cabrera's most curious legacy was his attempt to foster a cult of Minerva in Guatemala. He ordered a number of Hellenic-style temples of Minerva built in cities around the country. El Señor Presidente, written in 1946, won the Nobel Prize for Miguel Asturias. And so let's launch into a discussion on this book. Again, thanks for being here, panelists. I would start off with a question just to toss out. The writing style in this book is described as literary satire using surreal dream sequences to describe a corrupt police state. Was this an effective approach to you as readers?
I think it was very effective. I think it helped build the sense throughout the book that of terror, of the fear that people lived in on a daily basis. And instead of stating it outright, it was conveyed all the time with this imagery, very dark imagery and surreal imagery of, there was almost a nightmare quality to it. And I thought it was very effective. It had me terrified all the way through. Yeah, I thought he did it very well.
And just jump in if you have any other thoughts, but I think nightmarish is an excellent depiction.
Well, I guess we should say just a little bit that this book is about the president who was, it was a totalitarian government, and sort of about his reign and how it affected all the people. And so there were a lot of characters in this book, and they did, a lot of them have these dream, surreal sequences. And for me, it was effective too. Sometimes it was hard to follow because it was so linked to what was really happening that you didn't know when it was a dream and when it wasn't. But I thought it was really effective because it just showed how deep into the psyche this sort of government rule was, how sort of this idea that they're always watching you and they know everything you do is so infused in your own sense of your life that it comes out in your dreams too. And so I really liked that aspect of it, even though at times I was like, wait, is this really happening or is this not happening?
I think it goes, though, with a lot of Latin American fiction, though, in that style, that magic realism, the use of magic realism, the use of symbols in order to set that dark imagery and to really set the stage for what this society was like. I think the use of the symbolism really did make it very effective.
I just want to offer just a glimpse of this writing, just briefly. This is in the early part of the book, and it's a description by Asturias. The blood-red juice of dawn was staining the edges of the funnel of mountains encircling the town as it lay like a crust of scurf in the plain. It's colors and this imagery. It's really very compelling writing.
Like it's a crust of bread.
Yeah, a crust of bread.
It's very interesting, and they, so many inanimate objects they bring to life, whether it's the streets or in one place he talks about the urinals. There, you know, the wind comes to life and sounds like buzzards at times. I mean, that's very effective in terms of writing.
I think it also, just for the author himself who won a Nobel Prize, it was a chance for him to sort of show off in a way. I mean, he's so talented, and his ability to provide these really evocative descriptions and beautiful sentences really came in the dream sequences, because the rest was sort of action and didn't have that ability to sort of wax. And I thought he was a beautiful writer.
I mean, wouldn't we call it, if you did that type of writing in say, right now in modern times, you know, wouldn't it be overwriting? I mean, you know, couldn't you imagine your editor saying, oh no, that's so totally overwritten?
I thought about that a lot when I read this.
But it's interesting because, as you point out, there is that tradition in Latin American writing, and I think part of it is also inspired by the physical landscape. I mean, if you spend time in Latin American countries, they're so lush. The greens are so green, the flowers are so, the colors are so powerful. It is a landscape that's very alive, and so you find writers in that context who pull more life from it, and illusion, and it's I think it comes from where they write. I think that's part of it.
He writes, the steel fingernails of fever were clawing at his forehead. Disassociation of ideas, a fluctuating world seen in a mirror, fantastic disproportion, hurricane of delirium, vertiginous flight, horizontal, vertical, oblique, newly born, and dead in a spiral. You know, I mean, that describes this sort of outlook, I think.
But I think he sets up almost this death imagery throughout. I mean, there's an awful lot of dream sequences and where you're visited by death. Death is a character that comes alive in this book, And there's so much of that symbolism that really does come alive, and that those dream sequences are kind of like, it allows us then to, to think about death and to be in an otherworldly state, so we're not really dealing with the here and now.
Do you think Catholicism may have an influence on this kind of this power of symbolism? The book takes place in a Catholic country, prayers, devotions, priests, churches, sacraments. Is there a contradiction between a devout nation and crimes and a nation that perpetrates crimes against humanity? Or how do you think Catholicism fits into this sort of theme?
That's a big one.
Go ahead, Mitzi.
No, please.
I think every religion has had its times where their history has, there's been brutal instances in their religion. I think virtually every religion has seen that, not only Catholicism, but certainly the Catholicism in this book and the rigorous symbolism of Catholicism. I think you could see a lot of parallels in the symbolism in this book, so yes.
I actually thought it was, maybe going beyond the symbolism, I thought it was so bleak, like religion didn't matter. It didn't matter if you had faith. It was really about the president and what his will was. There is a man of faith who's in prison as one of the characters, and I just don't think the faith in God gets you anywhere. It's sort of like you have to be with the president. That becomes your faith, even to the point of maybe turning against your family members to save yourself. And so I think faith is kind of lost.
I think that faith is sort of a habit. I think, and there are probably very contemporary analogies, but where Catholicism is, a way of life, it's a practice, but when the state is that powerful and the police are that powerful, I think that despite the significant role of the Catholic Church, at that point, it's subsumed, like everybody else is, into a state of fear and being singularly controlled by the government. And so people keep their habits of worship and religion and whatever their practices are. But there were times in the book you felt like the church was as complicit in crimes as the state was. The church wasn't protecting anybody, and there were people of faith who were talking to judges who were imprisoning people willy-nilly, and you didn't feel like Catholicism was playing a very noble sort of role.
He states in here at one point that life is really a lottery in this country, and it's just the luck of the draw, what happens to you. And Mitzi, your point about this book being a grim depiction, it is grim. It was difficult to read. The details of torture and suffering, human abuses, was that necessary to convey this message? Should it have been that strong? Was it effective, and was it entertaining?
I don't think you could have set the stage for for the tyranny of this society without that grimness. So I do think the grimness in terms of the writing was necessary. Was it entertaining? Boy, that really brings up a whole nother, why do you read a book like this? I don't think we read books like this for entertainment, though I do think that I think it's good to be challenged sometimes. And when you see it's a Nobel Prize winning book, we don't read an awful lot of Latin American authors. We haven't been exposed to that in our educational system, at least up to now. So it's nice to be challenged and read a book like this. Is it a beach read? I don't think so.
Or could you read it before bed?
Well, I did, because that's the only time I can read, but it kept me awake a couple of nights.
Yeah.
And I would be in the middle of a sequence where the woman, Nina Fedina, someone was being tortured and made to scrub the floor with lime and then given back her baby. Awful scene. And I couldn't stop because I was in the middle, and I knew that I didn't want to resume this tomorrow, so I needed to get through it. But then I was awake for hours because it was horrible. It was horrible.
I think too that it was such a visceral book for people like us who have grown up in this free society to read about what it's really like to live in a totalitarian society and under tyranny, and how that sort of rule infiltrates to a barkeeper, to, you know, the daughter of someone, to the brother of someone who
People
might have
walking down the street
accused.
who apologize for walking down the street and hurry to get off the
Right.
sidewalk.
To see sort of this one person and how the fear of him just drips through the entire society is really overwhelming and really educational.
Well, it's that illogical tyranny. I mean, you think, to me, I don't think we're all that far away from this society in a way. I mean, to me, it very much mirrored 1984, the novel, and that, you know, you had an oppressive government who was able to hold up a number of fingers, and even though they held up 3 fingers, they wanted you to see 4 fingers. And in this instance, we have a president that even though one person committed a murder, he wanted his political opponents prosecuted. So he tells who did the murder, and he gets all the beggars to change their story with the judge advocate. And, you know, it is that type of oppression, that type of group think that, you know, you think this really isn't too far from our society today, in a way.
Your point of the illogical nature of this oppression, that's what is so, I think, frightening about it. There is no rhyme or reason. It is on the whim of a person who turns out to be really insane. I mean, he's criminally insane, this president, and his followers who do his bidding for him. And it's amazing to me that a people could allow that kind of abuse, that kind of tyranny to rule over them. But I also reflect on what is a prison experience. Is it Abu Ghraib? The images we saw from that prison experience could be in this book. Tortures and humiliations and degrading debasement of human beings. So it's not an isolated thing. And the fact that there's no resolve in the book, it ends with the same grim uncertainty. So, you know, it's not like justice is suddenly done and the good guys march in and all is well. Should this book have had a resolve? Would that have made us feel better about it?
It is an interesting, as a writer, what do you think in terms of, you know, ending a book like this on such a down, it was a real down tone and a little plot point at the end that was fairly negative. I mean, there was absolutely no hope, I thought, at the end. You know, as a writer, would you end a story like that?
Yeah, I would. I mean, I just think it's truth. I think it's mirroring, you know, how this was. You definitely can't have people like drive off into the sunset with everything be happy, because it wasn't like that. It existed for years in these countries. And when I was reading it, I was thinking a lot about North Korea, and when Kim Jong-il died, and if people didn't cry, they were imprisoned. Like, they had to show this grief, and how much you can't live an authentic life. You can't even be true to your innermost feelings, even with your own family, maybe.
Yeah, exactly.
And so I just thought that you know, it was true to what that life is like. It seems like there is no ending.
I think that's right.
I mean, I was just thinking, you know, and reading, and you know, in the paper about, you know, Muslim students being watched in America, and I was thinking, you know, if you're one of those students, this isn't very far from your reality. And even though, you know, there might be a good reason for it, you know, the oppressiveness of government sometimes is illogical. And what is the reality? You know, if your reality is that a company from America comes down and takes over your fruit, if you fight that company, then you're a terrorist. You know, our labels, it really kind of shows how we label things, and it's really the good guys are the ones that are writing the history afterwards, so we can really label whether or not they really were good or bad. You know, so.
But you made the comparison to Abu Ghraib, and I think, and Mitzi's talking about how this level of terror sort of seeps into it's cellular. I mean, people are really reduced to living their lives only to, not to make sense of them, just to avoid something worse. and the worse is very bad. I think people are debased even further to sort of an animal state, which is what the pictures of Abu Ghraib remind me of. And I think you end up dehumanizing people, and they become and are treated like animals in prison situations. Because they're, as you say, you can't live an authentic life. You don't have a personality. You're not allowed to think what you think. You're not allowed to show what you think. I think it's a complete stripping away of who you are as a person, period. And to have that, for somebody to have that kind of control over, psychologically, over a country, it's terrifying.
Maybe that's why Asturias began the book with the zany and the mosquito. He even named people with bizarre names, or an insect, someone who could be a human being but be so insignificant to be labeled as an insect, and to literally, in this book, be squashed out by the power of the state. So that animal aspect, the dehumanizing into an animal being without rights or feelings or any human characteristics. Yeah, Asturias did a terrific job in a horrific way of bringing that to bear.
Yeah. I wondered too what was going on for him. I mean, he was writing this in Paris. And I read that he wrote it in 1933 but didn't publish it until 1946.
Much later.
And I don't know why did he wait so long?
I thought it was interesting that he gave what I thought was the protagonist in the book, Angel Face, same first name as him.
Right.
So was he then kind of encapsulating his own experience in the dictatorship that he grew up in this story? Probably, to some,
How does this book speak to availing yourself to the power elite, to subordinating yourself to autocratic leaders or people of influence? What's the backstory psychologically in that context?
Are we speaking of Angel Face, or?
Angel Face would be one. I mean, he certainly endears himself. He's endeared himself to the president. He's a favorite guy. He's called the favorite.
Called the favorite.
And yet he falls out of favor because he develops a personal interest. It's love. He falls in love. Well, that's not part of the game. He's not maybe allowed to fall in love, especially with the daughter of a political enemy of the president. So how do how does Asturias describe this need to proclaim fealty to the power elite? What is the risk if you don't, I guess?
Well, the risk, the risk must be, if you're at the top, like Angel Face, the risk is probably more obvious to you because you've seen or had something to do with putting a lot of other people in jail or punishing them. But there are even parts of this book that are dedicated to the letters that the president would get on a daily basis.
Right.
Dear esteemed, beloved leader,
Yeah, right.
I'm writing you to tell on somebody else. And I just want you to know that I'm absolutely devoted to you, but this guy is doing something wrong. So people are tattling on each other. And I think and that's at the lower levels of society, and the higher levels of the power structure, that people like Angel Face are, serving at the grace of the president. And if, and he seems to be drunk a great deal of the time, and today you're on the good side and tomorrow you could be out. And if you're out, that's, you go all the way to the bottom.
Right.
The power of the written word. I thought that was an interesting theme in this book, and how the authorities use the power of that written word, and how they get people
to sign stuff.
Right,
Yeah.
right. So there was legal sort of, there was an established legal path.
A justification.
A justification through,
Yes, that's right.
through a phony court and phony
Right.
documents and coerced confessions, but there it stood.
And lying too, to say this is what you're signing, and they can't read.
Oh, and then he did
Right.
that. then that
And
was
that's
Right.
not really
And it's not really what they signed.
what they signed.
Yeah.
And
Right.
I'm curious too about, I don't know that much about Asturias, but obviously he had this perception of being in a free country when he was writing this, and how how did that really influence his ability to look at his own culture from a distance? And I mean, clearly, if he had lived in this, he could have maybe secretly written it, but he couldn't have published it if he had stayed in Guatemala. So I'm sort of curious about the juxtaposition between that society and ours, and where do we overlap? Things like the Muslim students and the Department of Homeland Security, and how do we, where do we find some kind of balance in safety and freedom? And I think it's interesting.
Asturias, courageous writer,
Yes.
but probably compelled as well. I mean, he had to write this story. And doesn't it come to a point for a writer like this, perhaps, where no matter what the risk, they're going to write this book? They have to, because it's their truth.
I don't know if you could write it. I don't know if he could have written it then in Guatemala.
No.
No. So you may have a book to read, a book you have to write, but you have to write it somewhere where you'll survive writing it.
Right, yeah.
So, but yes, a story that you would have to tell, I think.
And I think too, what's interesting about this is he never names the country. So even
Yes.
though we know that he's Guatemalan and this took place in Guatemala, it sort of has this like every country sort of feel to
Right.
it. And it also, he really makes one reference to the time. And so as I was reading it, I didn't know if we were talking about the early 1900s, the 30s. They had mentioned television, but I think they'd mentioned television, but then they had horses, and I couldn't really figure out.
You know, our time is running out. So let's leave that question hanging, but just quickly, 10 seconds each. Would you recommend this book to anybody? Why or why not? Chelsea?
I would recommend this book to someone who's very interested in in history, in politics, because I think, as Mitzi's saying, because it's almost an out-of-time, out-of-place book, there are a lot of analogies. There are places all around the world, whether the United States is playing a role or another country is playing a role, where people have lived or do live under this kind of oppression, and it's good to know about.
We're going to have to wrap, unfortunately, but thank you very much, my panelists, Chelsea Congdon, Steve Alldredge, and Mitzi Rapkin, and thank you, readers and listeners, for tuning in to AWF Reads. This is Paul Andersen saying goodbye and good reading.
Book lovers,
that was
tune
good. I think
in
we
to
covered
AWF Reads, the book discussion program presented by the Aspen Writers Foundation. At the Aspen Writers Foundation, sharing words, ideas, and stories are at the heart of all we do. Through our year-round program for all ages, we bring together readers and writers like you to celebrate the written word. For more information, call 925-3122 or visit aspenwriters.org. AWF Reads is generously sponsored by Elaine and Harris Kahn.